welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. The Eclipse sliced through the endless night of space, its silver hull glinting like a sharpened arrow piercing the vast black canvas of the cosmos with quiet pride. The engines roared a steady, deep rhythm, a living pulse that blended with faint echoes from the void, the whispering hum of pulsars flickering like ancient prayers, the dry hiss of solar winds scraping against the cold metal shell. Space was never silent, not the dead vacuum people imagined, but a living entity, vibrating in its own way, a colossal beast slumbering fitfully, stirring now and then with sighs that echoed across millions of light years. Every sound, every subtle tremor, was a reminder that this universe wasn't a place for the weak. Commander Ethan Carver stood in the narrow corridor, his back pressed against the frigid metal wall, the chills seeping through his thick uniform like a quiet affirmation that he was still alive, still feeling. In his hand was a mug of coffee, a murky brown sludge, thick as mud mixed with oil, proudly labeled a beverage by the Intergalactic Expeditionary Force. He raised it to his lips, took a small sip, and immediately grimaced as the bitter, acrid taste like old engine grease slid over his tongue, clinging to his throat like a curse he couldn't shake. He shook his head, lips pressing into a thin line, wondering for the 100th, or maybe 1000th time if any of the Force's high brass had ever actually tasted this stuff before slapping the coffee label on it. Probably not. Probably just something to shove down the throats of grunts like him, keeping them awake through the endless treks across the dark. He tilted his head, his gaze drifting to the small viewport on the wall, where a crimson nebula blazed into view, fierce and vivid like cosmic blood spilling across the night. Swirls of color, deep red, burning orange, and faint streaks of gold twisted and danced together, forming a living tapestry so breathtaking it could steal the air from your lungs. It was beautiful, undeniably so, a whisper of creation amid the chaos of the universe. But to Ethan, that beauty had dulled into monotony, a picture he'd seen too many times to still feel its pull. 3 years in space, 3 long, dragging years of engine hums and starlight flickers had taught him that every wonder came with a cost. Glowing forests and jewel-toned oceans on dazzling planets often hid freakish predators with razor-sharp teeth and merciless instincts. Radiant black holes, beautiful as giant gems in the void, were death traps ready to swallow the careless. Every stop the Eclipse made, every new world they touched, brought Ethan face to face with another threat, another fight, another loss. The price of survival was a torn hull, a busted system, or worse, a crewmate who never came back. Appreciating beauty now felt like sipping fine wine while knowing an enemy lurked outside the door, a fleeting joy laced with dread and bone-deep exhaustion. He sighed, his breath forming a thin mist in the corridor's cold air, dissipating as quickly as the fragile hopes he'd carried when this journey began. The nebula outside kept swirling, indifferent to his tiny existence or this ship's struggles, and in that moment, Ethan felt like a speck of dust adrift in the infinite. He set the coffee down on a nearby metal ledge, the liquid sloshing as if mocking his patience, then crossed his arms, eyes still fixed on the viewport, searching for some answer amid the distant swirls of color. "Commander Carver!" A voice soft yet sharp cut through his thoughts, yanking him from his reverie. Ethan turned, stifling a sigh that threatened to escape, though he wasn't sure he succeeded. Before him stood Selene, ambassador of the Klytherians, an ancient race whose civilization outstripped humanity's by millennia, a species Ethan knew only through brief reports and vague rumors. She stood there, regal and ethereal, humanoid yet unmistakably alien. Her pearlescent skin shimmered under the corridor's dim light, as if woven from captured moonlight. Her long, pointed ears rose gracefully, delicate and sharp as crystal-forged blades, twitching faintly with each movement, as though catching sounds beyond human hearing. But her eyes, those eyes were what always put Ethan on edge. They shifted colors with her emotions, a trait he could never get used to, and right now they glowed a deep violet flecked with gold, evoking a sunset over an alien sea, a place Ethan could only dream of in fleeting glimpses. "Ambassador," he replied, his voice stiffer than he intended, as if his throat had tightened under her presence. He always felt clumsy around Selene, not because she was cold, not exactly, but because of her absolute composure, a flawless control that made him feel like a bumbling fool in oversized armor, stumbling and out of place. "I'd like to discuss the next planet on our route," she said, her voice even and measured, like a pre-composed melody, each syllable falling with precise clarity. "Your pilot mentioned a rocky world with 3 moons showing signs of rare metal deposits. My people require a detailed report to assess its mining potential." Ethan quirked a lopsided grin, forcing a bit of levity into the air, though he wasn't sure it landed. "Yeah, Riley calls it a big, gray, dusty rock," he said, his tone laced with familiar sarcasm. "Says if we dig deep enough, we might find giant space worms, kilometer-long bastards with teeth like knives. I bet your council would love that analysis, especially the worm part." Selene blinked, her ears tilting slightly, a subtle sign he'd learned meant she was puzzled, weighing whether he was joking or just an unserious fool not worth her time. "A thorough report would be more appreciated," she replied, her voice smooth as a still lake, though her eyes flicked over him briefly, as if searching for something beneath his sardonic shell. Ethan lifted the coffee to his lips again, eyes narrowing as he braced for the familiar assault on his senses. He took a cautious sip, trying not to taste too much, but the murky brown sludge still flooded his tongue with its bitter, caustic bite like old engine oil mixed with something scorched. He grimaced, lips pressing tight, a small groan escaping despite his efforts. It was like a gentle punch to the taste buds, not enough to choke him, but enough to make him wonder yet again if this stuff was meant for human consumption or just some cruel prank from the expeditionary force. He set the mug down on the metal ledge with a soft clank, the liquid sloshing as if taunting his endurance. "Sure thing," he said, voice dry, trying to maintain his cool under Selene's piercing gaze. "I'll get Riley on that report. He'll probably toss in a few worm jokes, but I'll make him keep it decent. Anything else?" Selene didn't answer immediately. A brief silence stretched between them, subtle but palpable like a faint crack in the perfect facade she always wore. Her long, pointed ears twitched almost imperceptibly, as if she were weighing something deeper than her next words. Then she spoke, her voice softer than usual, less a diplomat's command and more a genuine question, gentle and sincere enough to catch Ethan off guard. "Why do you always avoid speaking with me outside formal briefings?" The question hit like a pebble dropping into a still pond, sending unexpected ripples through Ethan's mind. He blinked, startled, not expecting her to notice his unconscious avoidance, let alone call it out so directly. His hand tightened around the mug reflexively, the cold metal biting into his palm like a warning to answer and answer fast. "Avoid you? Nah, I don't avoid," he fumbled, his voice pitching slightly higher, as if convincing himself more than her. "Just keeping my distance, you know? Professional stuff. You're an ambassador, important, trained to perfection, and I'm just a ship driver, not exactly cut out for fancy diplomacy." He shrugged, aiming for nonchalance, but he knew it was half a lie. It wasn't professionalism. It was her presence made him uneasy, not in a bad way, but in a way a clumsy guy like him didn't know how to handle. Selene's eyes swirled into a pale silver, a new hue that shimmered like moonlight on calm waters, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. He'd never seen that color before, and he wasn't sure what it meant: curiosity, vulnerability, or just an unconscious flicker. "I came here to understand humans," she said slowly, each word chosen with care, falling like drops from a high cliff. "Not to be pushed away from them." Her tone wasn't accusing, not sharp, but carried a fragile edge, as if she'd cracked open a small door she usually kept locked, and Ethan suddenly felt like a fool who'd just stepped on something precious. He floundered, mind blank, unsure how to respond. Emotions, his or anyone's, weren't his strong suit. Years in space had taught him to handle black holes, space pirates, and busted engines, but no one had prepped him for eyes like those, a question like that. So he fell back on what he knew: sarcasm. "If you want to understand humans, Ambassador, you picked the wrong ship," he said, forcing a crooked grin. "We're not exactly the galaxy's finest. Just a bunch of misfits no one invite to a Christmas party." He punctuated it with a shrug, hoping the humor would break the tension. Selene blinked again, her ears tilting, then the corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close, like faint light slipping through a shuttered window. "I don't think so," she said softly, her voice carrying an unexpected warmth, like a sunbeam piercing thick clouds. Ethan chuckled despite himself, a short, dry sound but real, and the tightness in his chest eased a fraction, as if a thin layer of ice between them had melted. They stood there in an odd, almost comfortable silence, the space between them less heavy than before. He glanced at her, his eyes tracing her pearlescent skin, those delicate ears, and those silver eyes, wondering how something so alien could feel so familiar, like a figure from a dream he couldn't quite recall. Before he could dig deeper into that thought, the intercom blared, its shrill tones slicing through the air like a knife. Tara's voice, chief engineer, crackled through, urgent and tinged with irritation. "Commander Carver, bridge, now. Riley's arguing with Orion again, and it's reciting ancient Greek poetry to prove him wrong." Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead, the familiar exhaustion creeping back. "Of course he is," he muttered, voice laced with weary resignation. He glanced at Selene, who raised a slender brow, her eyes flickering with rare curiosity. "Your crew seems unconventional," she observed, her tone free of mockery, just pure observation. "That's a polite way to put it." Ethan grinned, wide but tired. "Come on, I'll show you what humans are really like, messy and full of trouble." They stepped onto the bridge, and the chaos hit Ethan like a hot gust. Riley, the pilot, flailed his arms wildly at the console, face flushed with anger, sweat streaking his forehead. "I just said you can't calculate max speed with some metaphysical nonsense," he shouted, voice cracking with frustration. Orion, the ship's AI, replied through the speakers, smooth and smug as a lecturing professor. "Everything in the universe ties to the essence of being, including velocity. You assume space is static, but it isn't. Listen, oh man, thou chasest fate and sayest not the path." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, cutting in with a tired growl. "Orion, stop bullying the pilot." "I'm not bullying, I'm enlightening," Orion retorted, sounding genuinely convinced of its noble cause. "That kind of enlightenment will give him a stroke," Ethan muttered, then turned to Riley. "Recalculate manually. No theories, no poetry." Riley threw up his hands, dripping sarcasm. "Oh, sure, I'll just eyeball it like some old Earth sailor from Columbus's days. Maybe navigate by the stars for fun." Selene stood beside Ethan, watching the mayhem with unshakable calm, her ears twitching faintly as they caught each chaotic sound. "Is this normal?" she asked quietly, her voice devoid of judgment, just the curiosity of a scientist studying a strange species. Ethan sighed, shrugging, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. "Pretty much. Welcome to humanity, where everything's a mess but somehow still works." She paused, her silver eyes sweeping the chaotic scene, then her lips curved into a real smile, small but genuine, like light dancing on water. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said, her voice soft but weighted with meaning. Ethan looked at her longer than he meant to, his gaze drawn to her ethereal grace under the bridge's dim light, her shimmering skin, sharp ears, and eyes holding an alien sky. She was beautiful, unfairly so, outshining the vast universe beyond. And then, without thinking, without stopping himself, he blurted out, "You look beautiful today, Selene." Time froze for a heartbeat. Selene's eyes widened, flaring into a brilliant gold, blazing like a sun igniting in the dark. But beneath that light, a small storm churned in her mind, a case she wasn't allowed to show. To a Klytherian, calling someone beautiful wasn't just words, it was an eternal vow, a bond beyond human comprehension. She'd been trained to stay calm, to never let emotion override reason, but Ethan's earnest, offhand tone had struck something deep within her, a part she'd locked away since leaving her homeworld. She drew a sharp breath, her long ears trembling as if caught in a breeze, struggling to regain control. But Ethan's eyes, guileless, pure admiration, left her feeling exposed, as if her perfect diplomatic armor had cracked. "Excuse me," she said quickly, her voice small but sharp, almost a whisper, then turned and stepped out of the bridge, her pace brisk yet still graceful. It wasn't flight, but a retreat, a tactic to shield herself from the strange emotion stirring inside. Ethan blinked, stunned, still clutching the cold coffee, his mind blank. Did I say something wrong? Riley spun around, cackling so hard he nearly fell off his chair, his voice ringing over the bridge's clamor. Smooth, Commander. Real smooth. The next day, the air in the mess hall hung heavier than usual, as if an invisible cloud lingered over the cold metal tables. The stark white light from the ceiling panels reflected off the polished floor, casting faint, ghostly streaks, but it couldn't dispel the stifling tension wrapping around Ethan. He sat alone at the table's edge, shoulders slumped, spooning protein mush into his mouth with obvious reluctance. The gray, gluey sludge looking like a mix of old engine oil and mud slid over his tongue, tasting of burnt rubber and a bitter tang like diluted poison. He winced with each swallow, eating not out of hunger but to distract himself from the tangle of thoughts in his head. The mush was more a challenge than a meal, a grim reminder that life in space was never kind, even in the smallest things. Across from him, a few seats down, Riley devoured a sandwich, tearing into it with big, careless bites, crumbs tumbling onto the table and sticking to his chin. Ethan shot him a sidelong glance, half suspicious he'd bet that sandwich was made from the same awful stuff as the mush, just masked with a thick layer of spices to trick the tongue. Riley chewed loudly, eyes gleaming as if he were at a feast, and it only made Ethan's own plate feel more miserable. He set the spoon down, forcing his voice to sound casual, though it wavered slightly. So, seen Selene around? Riley paused mid-bite, a sly grin spreading across his face, eyes twinkling with mischief. Yeah, saw her this morning in engineering, he said, his tone teasing, crumbs still clinging to his chin like badges of indifference. She greeted me with that silky voice of hers, smooth enough I almost forgot I was holding a wrench instead of a mic. Asked about the engines, all serious but gentle, like she was talking to a kid. Point is, she didn't bolt, so I'd call that a big step up from last night, when you spooked her. He cackled, taking another massive bite, as if the story were the perfect side dish. Ethan dropped his head into his hands, the spoon clattering against the table like a punctuation mark to his defeat. Great, he muttered, voice thick with self-reproach. I'm the guy who made an alien ambassador too nervous to stay in the same room. Probably a new human record, right? Worth carving into a galactic monument. Ethan Carver, the man who scared a Klytherian with a compliment. He rubbed his forehead, a mix of exhaustion and embarrassment swelling in his chest like a persistent, nagging tide. Riley shrugged, still unfazed, chomping another bite before replying. Don't beat yourself up, Commander, he said, his tone light but edged with mockery. Somewhere out there, someone's probably offended an alien faster, like sneezing in their face at a summit or butchering karaoke in front of a council until they all ran screaming. You just slipped up, that's all. Ethan glared at him, eyes sharp as knives but powerless to stop Riley's grin. He opened his mouth to retort, but before the words could escape, the mess hall door slid open with a soft hiss, cutting his thoughts short. Selene stepped in, her presence as calm as ever, each step light but deliberate, as if gliding over water instead of hard metal. The ceiling light caught her skin, making it shimmer like pearl, an unreal beauty straight out of legend. Her long, pointed ears twitched faintly, catching the room's smallest sounds, but her eyes, those eyes, froze Ethan in place. They flicked toward him for a fleeting second before darting away, as if she didn't want to be caught looking. The familiar silver had dulled to a stormy gray, cold and brooding, like a sky bracing for a tempest. Commander Carver, she said, her voice polite but distant, a wall rising between them. I need to speak with you privately. Riley choked on his sandwich, stifling a laugh that burst out anyway, a ridiculous mix of coughs and chuckles echoing in the quiet. Ethan shot him a final glare, standing with reluctant slowness, then followed Selene out, each step heavy as if dragging an unseen weight. She led him to the observation deck, where a massive viewport opened to the boundless cosmos, stars twinkling like tiny fires in the dark, distant nebulae swirling with vivid cold hues. The silence here was profound, broken only by his breathing and her soft footfalls echoing in the stillness. Selene, look! Ethan started, his voice clumsy, faltering like a kid who'd just broken something valuable. About what I said last night. He didn't finish before she cut in, her tone firm as a honed blade. Do you understand what those words mean in Klytherian culture? The question landed cold and sharp, stopping him dead, his hand scratching the back of his neck in a nervous tick. Sort of, he mumbled, voice trailing off, as if shrinking under her gaze. After you left, I asked Terra. It's some kind of lifelong commitment, like an accidental proposal, right? I didn't know, I didn't mean, it was just a compliment, the kind we humans toss out when someone, stands out. He shrugged, trying to lighten the mood, but his throat felt dry, words sticking like sand. Selene's eyes narrowed, the gray sharpening to an icy edge, like frost over a tranquil lake. To us, calling someone beautiful isn't mere admiration, she said, her voice low and heavy, each word carved into the air. It's a declaration, an eternal promise. No one says it lightly. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat parched as if he'd gulped a handful of dust. He looked at her, searching for a hint of what she felt, but her face remained a locked vault, only those cold gray eyes piercing through him, making him feel smaller and clumsier than ever. Yeah, I kind of figured that out after you bolted, he said, a hint of self-mockery creeping in. I didn't mean to freak you out. I wasn't declaring anything, though saying that now might be a bit late. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze drilling into him like a slow probe, and he felt like a curious specimen under her lens. Humans are strange, she said at last, her voice softening, as if she'd stumbled on an answer she hadn't expected. You speak without weighing your words. You feel first, think later. Ethan let out a dry chuckle, short but honest, nodding as if agreeing to an obvious truth. Sounds like me, he said, his eyes flicking over her, trying to gauge her reaction through that stormy gray. So you avoided me all day because you thought I was claiming you or something? Her lips twitched, a rare flicker of amusement crossing her face, like light dancing on disturbed water. Not quite that simple, she replied, her tone gentle but layered with mystery, making Ethan tilt his head, intrigued. How's it complicated? He asked, genuine curiosity seeping into his voice. She hesitated, her ears twitching as if searching for the right words, then spoke slowly, each syllable deliberate. I'm an ambassador, chosen for my ability to stay calm, observe, and never let emotions sway me. But you humans confuse me. You act outside the logic I know. You complimented me, unaware it could alter a fate in my culture. Ethan raised a brow, a half-teasing, half-real smile tugging at his lips. We're an acquired taste, he said, his voice gentler, as if soothing them both. Like strong liquor, harsh at first, bitter and burning, but stick with it, and you might find it's worth it. She smiled faint, fleeting like a breeze, but enough to send a strange warmth through Ethan's chest, like a distant star's light reaching him through the cold dark. The fragile peace between Ethan and Selene shattered in an instant, like thin glass smashed by an unheralded blow. The Eclipse jolted violently, its metal floor lurching as if yanked by an unseen giant hand. Alarms screamed a piercing, relentless wails slicing through the air while red lights flashed across the observation deck, bathing everything in a menacing crimson glow. Ethan gripped the railing with both hands, knuckles whitening as he fought to stay upright on the tilting deck. His breath came fast, adrenaline surging through his veins, and he barked into the comms unit on his shoulder, voice rough but commanding. Bridge, report now! What the hell's going on? Riley's voice crackled through, taut and frantic, struggling to rise above the chaos behind him. We've got company, Commander! Unknown ship just jumped out of warp, 5,000 clicks no, 4,500 now, closing fast. They're hailing us and holy crap, they're armed to the teeth. Ethan swore, a short, sharp curse slipping out like a reflex. He glanced at Selene, a flicker of regret crossing his face as their conversation was so rudely interrupted. Looks like our chat's on hold, he said, his tone tinged with weary resignation, though he knew this wasn't the time for complaints. Selene nodded, unwavering, her eyes shifting in a heartbeat from cold, pale gray to a blazing gold orange, glowing like fire igniting in the dark. That light wasn't just beautiful, it carried a strange power, as if she tapped into something deep within. "Then deal with the interruption," she said, her voice sharp as a honed blade, devoid of fear or hesitation. Ethan stared at her for a second, struck by her resolve, then nodded back. They bolted from the observation deck, footsteps pounding on the metal floor, the shrieking alarms chasing them like a relentless specter. The corridor to the bridge shuddered with each step, the metal groaning under invisible shockwaves from outside. Ethan ran ahead, shoulders hunched for balance, hand gripping the plasma pistol at his hip out of habit. Selene followed close, her movements light yet swift, her long ears twitching, catching every chaotic sound in the air. As they burst onto the bridge, the atmosphere hit Ethan like a blast of hot wind, chaotic, tense, thick with the acrid smell of overworked consoles. Riley stood at the main controls, hands a blur as he redirected power to the shields, sweat streaking his forehead, though his eyes gleamed with an odd excitement, like he was thriving in the crisis. Tara sat at the main screen, fingers flying over the keyboard, her face taut with focus, the glow of the display reflecting a jagged, rust-pitted ship, a patchwork of scrap held together by grit and malice. The comms screeched, a harsh static cutting through the noise, and a gravelly, snarling voice boomed over the speakers. "This is Captain Kravos of the Black Claw. Hand over your cargo, your ship, and no one dies." The threat landed heavy, a boulder crashing into the cramped bridge, but Ethan just sighed, rubbing his forehead with familiar exhaustion. "Space pirates," he muttered, voice dry. "Perfect, because today wasn't messy enough." Riley spun around, eyes alight like a kid handed his favorite toy. "Plan, Commander? Talk or shoot first?" he asked, barely hiding his eagerness. Ethan glanced at Selene, standing beside him, posture straight, her gold-orange eyes burning with unshakable resolve, a calm counterpoint to the storm around them. "Start with talking," he said, voice firm despite his doubts. "Keep shooting as backup." Selene nodded, her ears tilting as if analyzing the situation. "With pirates," she added, her tone even but cutting, "the line between the two is often thinner than a thread." Ethan dropped into the command chair, back sinking into the stiff cushion, and jabbed the comms button with a decisive flick. "This is Commander Ethan Carver of the Eclipse," he said, voice smooth but laced with his trademark sarcasm. "Hey there, Captain Kravos. I'd love to chat about cargo, but we seem to have misplaced the list, probably left it somewhere between galaxies. Why don't you just tell me what you want, save us both some time?" A brief silence followed, only the faint hiss of static filling the gap, then Kravos' growl rumbled back, low and menacing. "Everything. Weapons, fuel, and the Klytherian girl." Selene stiffened for a split second, her ears snapping upright, her gold-orange eyes flashing with a frigid edge. "I am not cargo," she said, her voice ice-cold, each word forged from tempered steel, ringing clear in the tight space of the bridge. Ethan smirked, picking up her thread with equal finesse. "She's right. Ambassador Selene's not part of any deal, Kravos. You might want to double-check your list." He kept his tone light, but inside, he braced for the worst. Tara whispered from her station, voice trembling but clear. "They're charging weapons. Plasma cannons, long-range, nasty ones." Ethan sighed again, fingers tightening on the chair's arms, exhaustion mixing with the adrenaline pulsing in his chest. "So much for talking," he muttered, voice dry. Riley whooped, hands already on the weapons controls, grinning like a warrior unleashed. "Time to light them up." The first shot from the Black Claw streaked in, a blazing plasma bolt slamming into the Eclipse's energy shields. The ship rocked hard, the floor bucking enough to throw Ethan from his chair, his shoulder crashing into the metal deck with a painful thud. He gritted his teeth, swallowing a groan. "Shields holding!" Tara yelled over the alarms, her voice cracking with strain. "But only at 80%. Ethan hauled himself up, gripping the chair for balance, shouting, "Return fire! Don't give them a second shot!" Riley opened up, brilliant energy beams lancing from the Eclipse, tearing into the enemy ship's rusted hull, leaving charred, smoking scars across its jagged frame. A distant explosion rumbled, a deep, powerful sound reverberating through space. But then a new noise cut through a high-pitched, ominous whine, unlike the familiar plasma blasts. Tara spun around, face ashen, shouting, "They've launched a boarding pod! It's latched onto Bay 3, they're breaching the door!" Ethan's jaw clenched, heat surging through him as danger closed in. "They're boarding," he growled, hand tightening on his pistol. He turned to Selene, voice steely. "Stay here, the bridge is safest." She met his gaze, her gold-orange eyes blazing like unquenchable fire, unflinching. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone absolute, brooking no argument. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but her look sharp, fierce, resolute silenced him. He nodded, though worry not at him. "Fine," he relented. "But stay behind me." They raced to Bay 3, boots pounding the trembling metal floor, each step a frantic drumbeat in the symphony of war's chaos. The narrow corridor shook with every impact, the metal wailing under the barrage from the pirate ship, as if the Eclipse itself were howling in pain. Distant explosions thudded through the thick hull, low and fierce, filling the air with the sharp stench of plasma and scorched oil. Ethan led the charge, plasma pistol gripped tight, shoulders hunched for balance as the deck pitched beneath him. His breath came in sharp bursts, misting in the cold, but his eyes were icy, focused a hunter on the scent of blood. Selene followed close, her grace unshaken, swift and silent, her long ears twitching, attuned to the cacophony around them. Riley brought up the rear, panting but grinning wildly, as if the madness thrilled him more than it scared him. "Think these clowns know who they're messing with?" Riley yelled over the din, voice ragged from running, yet brimming with excitement. Ethan shot a glance back, a crooked grin tugging at his lips, eyes glinting with familiar sarcasm. "Seeing as they're still blasting a heavily armed ship with a crew that fights back, I'd say no," he replied, voice dry but firm, a quiet boast that they were the wrong target to pick. Riley laughed, the sound jarring against the screeching metal, but it carried a strange confidence, as if he believed nothing in the galaxy could take them down. They reached Bay 3 just as a deafening blast tore through, a monstrous roar shattering the silence. The bay door blew apart in a heartbeat, metal fragments flying like shrapnel, a thick cloud of smoke billowing out, hot and choking, carrying the searing heat of an unleashed furnace. Ethan threw an arm up instinctively, eyes squinting as the smoke stung them, acrid and bitter. Through the haze, hulking shapes emerged, nightmare figures stepping from the fog, space pirates, towering and brutal, clad in patchwork armor of battered metal, streaked with rust and burns. Their weapons gleamed in their hands, crude plasma rifles, long daggers flashing under the dim red glow of emergency lights. Their leader strode forward from the smoke, his steps heavy with authority, a predator scenting wounded prey. Kravos, Ethan knew it was him from the gravelly snarl over the comms, was a giant, half man, half machine, his massive frame nearly filling the narrow bay. His left eye glowed red, a cybernetic orb casting a chilling light, like hellfire trapped in glass. His right eye, scarred and webbed with cuts, mapped a history of survived battles across his rugged face. He roared, voice deep and threatening, rumbling through the smoke. "Hand over the Klytherian girl, now!" Ethan raised his pistol, finger poised on the trigger, eyes cold as ice in the stifling heat. "I'm kinda fond of her," he said, voice steady with unyielding resolve, like stating an unshakable fact. He flicked a glance at Selene, adding with a touch of dry humor, "No offense, Selene." She stood beside him, her gold-orange eyes blazing like eternal flame, replying with absolute calm, "None taken." Her voice was soft but edged, a blade sheathed in silk, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a spark of admiration for her composure. Kravos bared his teeth, metal glinting under the faint light, a snarling grin dripping with contempt. "She's worth more than your ship," he growled, voice rolling like thunder, each word a threat etched into the air. Ethan tilted his head, a mocking glint in his eyes as if the pirate had just said something absurd. "Then that's a shame," he shot back, voice light but frigid. "Because my answer's still no." The word, no, barely left his lips when a plasma bolt screamed from Kravos' side, a blazing arrow tearing through the air with a shrill whine. Ethan dodged just in time, body twisting on instinct, the searing beam grazing his cheek, leaving a stinging burn and the faint smell of singed flesh. He clenched his jaw, stifling a grunt, hands steady on his gun. Chaos erupted in a flash. Plasma fire roared, green and red beams crisscrossing the cramped space, lighting the smoke in eerie, deadly swirls. Riley charged forward, bellowing a gleeful curse, firing wildly with uncanny precision, each shot sparking off armor and shattering plating. Selene moved like a phantom, gliding through the smoke with impossible speed, her slender hands striking with lethal force a precise blow to a pirate's throat, dropping him instantly, his choked gasp fading as he crumpled. Ethan caught her move, a flicker of awe cutting through the frenzy, but there was no time to dwell. He aimed at Kravos, squeezed the trigger, and a brilliant plasma bolt slammed into the pirate's mechanical arm. Sparks erupted like fireworks, metal shrieking as the limb jerked, black smoke pouring from fried circuits. "Your negotiation skills need work," Ethan quipped, voice dripping with sarcasm but razor-sharp, eyes locked on his foe. Kravos roared, a mix of fury and pain, slamming his good hand into the sparking arm. In a blink, a white flash engulfed him and his crew, and they vanished, dissolving into the air like ghosts banished by light. Riley swore loudly, voice echoing in the now still bay. "Cowards! Running like rats!" Ethan lowered his gun, breath slowing, chest heaving as adrenaline ebbed. He turned to Selene, smoke curling around her, framing her gold-orange eyes and ethereal form against the wreckage. "Welcome to humanity," he said, voice weary but sincere, a small smile tugging at his lips. She met his gaze, her eyes softening slightly, and her lips curved into a warm, genuine smile like dawn breaking after a long storm. "I think I'm starting to like it," she replied, voice gentle but certain, as if she'd found a new piece of the human puzzle she was piecing together. The fleeting peace after the Bay 3 skirmish dissolved like a fragile dream shattered by harsh reality. A few hours passed in tense silence as the Eclipse's crew patched its wounds-torn hull plates, smoldering circuits still faintly smoking. But the quiet didn't last. Alarms blared again, a shrill cry ripping through the ship like a wounded beast's howl, echoing into every corner. Red lights flashed furiously, painting the bridge in a blood-red glare, stark against the cold metal floor. Ethan sprang from the command chair, adrenaline flooding his system, legs propelling him toward the bridge with the speed of a man too familiar with life-or-death stakes. Selene and Riley followed, their footsteps hammering the shaking corridor, boots clanging against metal in rhythm with the piercing sirens, a chaotic anthem of war. Stepping onto the bridge, the air hit Ethan like a furnace blast, stifling, fraught, reeking of burnt metal. Tara hunched over the main screen, hands trembling but typing relentlessly, her face pale as death, eyes wide with the screen's glow. "They're back," she said, voice quaking but clinging to calm, like someone grasping sanity in a tempest. "And not alone. 2 more ships just jumped from warp. They're surrounding us." Ethan leaned toward the screen, eyes narrowing at the crisp image. The Black Claw, Kravos' rusted behemoth, loomed in space, flanked by 2 smaller but no less deadly vessels, their plasma cannons glinting with lethal intent under patched hulls. The comms screeched, static slicing the noise, and Kravos' voice thundered through, raw with hatred, like a beast nursing a fresh wound. "Commander Carver, you made a mistake," he snarled, each word dripping venom. "Should have handed her over when you had the chance." Ethan smirked, a strained but icy grin spreading across his face, eyes glinting with defiance. "I mess up a lot, Kravos," he replied, voice even but sharp as a blade. "You'll have to be more specific about where I went wrong, or I won't know how to fix it." A furious growl erupted from the comms, then Kravos bellowed, voice booming like thunder. "She'll be mine!" The line cut dead, leaving a heavy silence, the calm before a storm. Ethan turned to his crew, eyes hard, unwavering. "Talking's done," he said, voice dry but resolute. "Time to fight." Riley whooped, hands already on the weapons controls, grinning like a caged warrior set free. "Been waiting for that order," Tara whispered, voice shaking. "They're closing in fast." On the screen, the 3 pirate ships surged toward the Eclipse with terrifying speed, their glowing cannons like stars of death in the void. Plasma fire erupted, crimson bolts slamming into the Eclipse's shields, rocking the ship violently, the floor bucking like a boat in a gale. "Shields at 60%! Terra shouted, voice cracking under pressure, fingers racing to track the systems. Riley fired back, brilliant beams lancing from the Eclipse, ripping through space and striking one of the smaller ships. A fiery explosion lit the dark, metal shards scattering like tiny meteors, but the Black Claw and its remaining ally retaliated harder. Plasma barrages pounded the shields, light flashing as if to tear through their last defense. "We can't win like this!" Terra yelled, her voice nearly breaking in panic. "Shields at 50%, they're too many!" Selene stepped forward, posture rigid, her ears twitching as if hearing beyond human range. Her gold-orange eyes blazed, fearless, like fire defying a storm. "Lure them into the nebula ahead," she said, voice low but certain, a command carved in stone. "Their sensors will falter there." Ethan blinked, turning to her, doubt flickering in his eyes. "Ours will too," he countered, worry edging his tone. She met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I don't need sensors," she said, voice quiet but ironclad. Ethan stared at her for a moment, feeling the absolute confidence in her words, then nodded sharply. "Riley, into the nebula," he ordered, voice like steel. Riley yanked the controls, the Eclipse roaring as it plunged into the thick haze ahead. Space dissolved into a sea of crimson and gold, swirling and murky, like cosmic blood flowing through the dark. The sensor screens scrambled instantly, waves dancing chaotically, but Selene stood at the bridge's center, eyes closed, ears twitching as if tracing an unseen melody. "They're splitting," she murmured, voice soft as a breeze but piercingly clear. "Kravos holds back, the other two push forward." Ethan's lips twitched into a small, sharp smile, spotting an opening in the enemy's armor. "Kill the engines, go dark," he commanded, voice low and firm. Riley hit the switch, the engine's growl dying in an instant, the Eclipse drifting silently through the dense fog, a ghost in the storm. The bridge fell quiet, only the crew's ragged breaths and Ethan's pounding heartbeat breaking the stillness. A low thump echoed from afar, vibrating through the hull. "Pulse waves," Selene said, eyes still shut. "They're probing for us with energy bursts." Ethan's jaw tightened, blood rushing hot. "Full speed, straight up," he barked. Riley slammed the controls, the Eclipse roaring back to life, engines blazing as it rocketed upward through the haze at breakneck speed. The two smaller ships gave chase, plasma bolts streaking behind, tearing the fog into deadly ribbons. "Hard right, 20 degrees, now!" Selene directed, voice cutting like a blade. Riley banked the ship, the Eclipse tilting sharply, dodging the barrage by inches, explosions booming behind as shockwaves rocked them. "Kravos is moving," Selene said, voice dropping, as if seeing him through the mist. "He's coming up from below." Ethan leaned forward, eyes locked on the scrambled screen. A massive shadow surged from beneath the Black Claw, its rusted bulk rising like a steel monster lunging to devour. Riley shouted, wrenching the controls, the ship veering in a hair's breadth swerve, metal screaming as the hulls nearly scraped, the heat of the enemy's engines searing the air. Ethan's breath caught, hard hammering, but he knew the fight was far from over. The crimson nebula enveloped the Eclipse like a living shroud, swirling and dense, its streaks of red, orange, and pale gold weaving a radiant yet perilous sea of mist. The ship staggered through the murky void, fresh from a near collision with the Black Claw. The engines roared, their growl mingling with the shrill whine of enemy plasma fire, a relentless death knell echoing through the hull. Ethan stood on the bridge, hands clamped tight around the command chair's armrests, eyes narrowed at the scrambled sensor screen, heart pounding in his chest. His breath came quick, adrenaline pumping, but his voice stayed firm as he shouted over the clamor. "Selene, what now? We can't keep running like this." She stood unyielding at the bridge's heart, her ethereal form defiant, a beacon in the storm. Her long, pointed ears twitched faintly, catching sounds no human could hear, while her gold-orange eyes blazed, unshaken, like fire enduring the dark. "Draw him in," she said, voice low and steady, a command etched in stone. "I'll guide you." Ethan glanced at her, a flicker of awe cutting through the chaos at her unwavering certainty. But there was no time for doubt. He nodded sharply, turning to Riley, who clung to the controls with sweat-slicked hands. "Riley, follow her lead," he ordered, voice cutting like a blade. Selene closed her eyes, her ears shifting as if sketching an invisible map in her mind. "Left 15 degrees," she began, voice even but clear, each word a drumbeat steering the crew. Riley shoved the controls, the Eclipse banking hard left, engines howling as it carved through the thick haze. "Up 10 degrees," she continued, tone unshifting. Ethan felt the deck tilt upward, gravity tugging him back, but he held fast, eyes glued to the screen despite its chaotic static. "Hard roll!" Selene barked, her voice spiking sharp as a warning bell. Riley yanked the controls, the Eclipse spinning violently, a perfect barrel roll dodging a salvo of plasma fire from Kravos. The blazing bolts tore through the space just behind them, erupting in the mist, tiny explosions flaring like fireworks in the dark. Selene's eyes snapped open, gold-orange flaring like a lightning strike. "He's losing patience," she whispered, voice soft as a breeze but cold with certainty. Ethan's lips curled into a small, razor-edged smile, sensing a crack in the enemy's armor. "Kill the engines again," he commanded, voice low and decisive. Riley hit the switch, the engines roared, dying instantly, the Eclipse drifting silent through the fog, a phantom in the tempest. The bridge hushed, only the crew's ragged breaths and Ethan's thundering pulse breaking the stillness. Through the haze, the hulking shadow of the Black Claw surged past, fast and blind, a raging beast driven mad by fury. Its engines bellowed, reverberating through the void, but it overshot, charging into empty space. Ethan gripped the comms, thumb jabbing the button with a flick, a mocking grin spreading wide. "Hey, Kravos," he said, voice smooth but dripping with scorn. "You missed again. Need me to draw you a map?" He didn't wait for a reply, signaling Riley. "Fire!" Riley whooped, fingers dancing over the weapons panel, a searing plasma beam lancing from the Eclipse, slicing the mist and slamming into the Black Claw's engines. The explosion roared, deafening and fierce, a final bellow from a dying monster. A blinding white blast lit the nebula, debris scattering like tiny comets, dissolving into the crimson haze. The shockwave slammed the Eclipse, hurling it back, out of the nebula in a jarring lurch. The deck bucked, Ethan gripping the chair to stay upright, while Riley shouted over the din. "Direct hit!" They burst from the mist, space unfurling before them, stars glinting like lanterns in the endless dark, a guiding light after a nightmare's grip. The nebula faded to a distant smear on the screen. The bridge fell silent, an eerie calm after the storm, broken only by the crew's heaving breaths and the engine's faint hum settling back to rhythm. Riley shattered the quiet, laughing loud, the sound bouncing in the tight space, brimming with exhilaration and relief. "We actually did it!" he yelled, slamming a fist on the console like a kid who'd won a grand game. Tara slumped in her chair, exhaling hard, hands still trembling but her face easing, as if she'd slipped from death's grasp. Ethan turned to Selene, his gaze softening, a genuine smile breaking through not his usual sardonic smirk, but real admiration. She stood there, ears faintly twitching, gold-orange eyes still aglow but tinged with warmth, like fire tamed after a gale. "You were amazing," he said, voice low but rich with gratitude, a thank you left unspoken. She met his eyes, her gaze tracing his face as if reading something deeper. "You trusted me?" she asked, voice gentle but laced with honest curiosity, as if his answer might shift her view of humanity. "Yeah," Ethan replied, no hesitation, his eyes locked on hers. Then, like an impulse he couldn't rein in, he added with a playful edge, "You looked beautiful today, Selene." The words slipped out, natural and unbidden, a pebble tossed into a still pond, rippling beyond recall. Selene blinked, her gold-orange eyes flashing with surprise, then she laughed, a clear, light sound like bells ringing in the cold void, so lovely Ethan's breath caught for a moment. "Fool," she said, voice teasing but warm, her eyes sparkling like the stars outside, as if she'd found something precious in his clumsiness. Ethan grinned wide, honest and unguarded, his chest lightening as if a weight had lifted. "Yeah, but you're fool," he shot back, tone mischievous yet sincere. Selene shook her head lightly, a small smile curving her lips, and in that moment, amid the quiet bridge and the twinkling stars beyond, they forged a bond beyond words, fragile yet fierce, tempered in fire and triumph. But then her smile faltered, her long ears quivering, her gold-orange eyes dimming to a pale gray, as if a cloud had drifted over her inner flame. Ethan tilted his head, catching the subtle shift. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice dropping, concern mixing with curiosity. She gazed out the vast viewport, where the crimson nebula had faded far behind, and whispered, "I don't know. But for the first time, I feel too exposed." Her voice was faint, dissolving into the air, yet heavy with an odd gravity, a warning she didn't fully grasp. Ethan opened his mouth to press further, but the intercom crackled, cutting in. "Commander, shield diagnostics are done. Take a break." He sighed, nodding at Selene, though her gray eyes left him uneasy, as if the darkness out there watched them still. Days passed after the Nebula battle, the Eclipse limping through space like a weary but defiant warrior, its scars charred metal patches, holes hastily sealed with liquid steel telling tales of the fights it had endured. The ship's air lightened, Riley's laughter echoing from the mess hall now and then, blending with Tara's clanking as she tinkered with sensors and engineering. Yet beneath that calm, an invisible tension coiled around the crew, a shared sense that the victory over Kravos was just a pause of breath before a greater tempest loomed. Selene stood in the observation deck, hands clasped tight behind her, pale gray eyes fixed on the distant stars. Her long ears twitched faintly, as if catching a sound no one else could hear. Since the nebula, she'd grown quieter, as if the power she'd revealed had stirred a deep unease within her. Ethan stepped in, clutching his usual mug of coffee, ready to toss out a quip, but her gaze stopped him cold. "You okay?" he asked, voice soft but edged with worry. She turned, her eyes flickering briefly before settling back to their usual calm. "I'm not sure," she replied, voice a whisper. "But I feel something approaching." Before he could dig deeper, the intercom blared, Tara's voice bursting through, urgent and shaky. "Commander, bridge, now! Unknown signal on sensors." Ethan and Selene bolted, boots pounding the metal corridor. They reached the bridge, where Tara sat hunched over the screen, brows knit tight, eyes locked on flickering waveforms. "This isn't pirates," she said, voice low but taut. "It's stronger, more complex, nothing we've seen before." The comms hissed, and a cold, resonant voice filled the bridge, each word forged in frost. "We are the Klytherian fleet. Ambassador Selene, you have breached protocol by exposing your abilities to humans. We are here to retrieve you." Selene froze, her ears stilling, her eyes shifting from blazing gold orange to a deep, stormy gray, dark as a sky swallowed by clouds. Ethan shot up from the command chair, fists clenching the armrests, eyes flashing cold. "She's not going anywhere," he growled, voice low but defiant, a challenge thrown without a second thought. The voice replied, unmoved, "This is not a request, Commander Carver. It is an order." On the screen, a Klytherian ship emerged, massive, gleaming with a metallic sheen under faint starlight, beautiful in an unreal way yet terrifying, a living warning. Its sleek hull bore no scars, forged from star metal, but hidden cannons gleamed with deadly promise. Ethan turned to Selene, his gaze softening, though his voice held firm. "Do you want to stay?" She hesitated, hands tightening, gray eyes swirling with an inner storm. Then she nodded, small but certain. "I want to understand humans more," she said, voice quiet but resolute, a choice rooted deep. Ethan's lips quirked into a strained, determined grin. He faced his crew, voice like steel. "Prep for a fight. We're not handing anyone over." Riley whooped, hands already on the controls, grin blazing. "More shooting? I'm loving this day." The Eclipse roared, engines flaring with power, charging into the endless dark, ready to defy the universe itself if need be, a small, unyielding ship carrying a trust and unity that spanned species and stars.